Good morning, everybody. I think that I've sorted out going live with a few hiccups, so just a few minutes late. But this morning, I'm going to offer some reflections for you all as I prepare for preaching this Sunday. So our text from John this week is a familiar one and one of my favorites, and one that is deeply important in our Christian tradition. And it's about Lazarus, the friend of Jesus, who dies and is resurrected. And so this morning, I wanted to offer just a bit of reflection for you to consider this morning from your home or wherever you are. And then I'm also going to read a bit of a poem by Lawrence Ferlinghetti. My favorite bookstore is City Lights Bookstore in San Francisco, very tied to the beatnik generation and literary history in our country, but especially there in San Francisco. And so there's a favorite poem of mine by Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who's a poet, American poet, deeply connected with that bookstore and with American literary history. So I'm going to kind of blend all these things together for you all, so you can just maybe see a little bit of where my mind is at in preparation for preaching this Sunday. I think that if all of the ministers on staff were honest, they would say, each in their own way, and I would say that one of the tasks of preaching is to carefully balance the pastoral and the political. And what I mean by that is that for me personally, I think each of us on staff, we have different inclinations of where we might fall on the spectrum. Lauren, for example, I don't think would be upset with me for saying that she, like me, tends towards the political often, but is also, very pastoral, in my opinion. Lauren is. But each of us, we have to figure out as we approach a text and as we consider what it means to stand in front of each of you all in our congregation, and also now on live stream, the whole internet and everything in it, how we balance what we believe is needed pastorally, meaning what are the needs of the congregation and of those listening? How can we speak a word of good news into the lives of people who are hearing our sermons wherever they are, either literally, physically, but also where they are in their lives? And then we also have to consider what is true in the public sphere and politically, meaning issues of justice often have a lot to do with what people in power, both on the local and national level, or the state or the national level, are doing in terms of public policy and public life in America. And so in those two spheres, there are a lot of overlapping concerns, but typically if you pick one or the other, the congregation will be able to tell quite obviously. And so what I've been struggling with this week, and in honesty, like probably the biggest struggle for me is I err on the side of the political. It's much easier for me to analyze and then criticize or offer a word of correction to political realities in our country, whether it be immigration reform, homophobia and transphobia, racism, the deep history of racism against Black and brown people in America. I find it really easy, or more natural, I shouldn't say easy, but more natural to intellectually pursue understanding and then preach from a concern in that sphere. But as I've grown at Highland and learned from my colleagues, from Joe and Nina before they retired, from my colleagues now, and also from my colleagues that I worked with, Bob Henderson and Jessica Patchett at Covenant Presbyterian in Charlotte, is that the pastoral perspective is crucial and really what makes church distinct. And what is different, I guess, or unique to Highland as a church is that we're not a political institution. And we're not chiefly concerned with political realities, though, of course, that's an important distinction. We're not chiefly concerned with political realities, but we are concerned with politics and justice. And so what I'm talking about is the difficulty. Some weeks when you open the paper, it is really easy, or it's really easy for me to go straight to the political. And knowing our congregation, I know for the most part, I don't have to elaborate on all the things that those might be. But this week, I want to say in particular, I've been thinking about how sometimes a sharp division between the political and the pastoral is the easy step of moderation, which protects listeners and the preacher from engaging hard substantive realities that need to be addressed. And sometimes it is true, and again, I'm treading carefully here, but sometimes it is true that the political and the pastoral intersect very deeply. And so this week I want to name, I'm not going to get up on Sunday. I mean, this is why it's good for me to, in a sense, workshop this idea or this thinking with you all today, as I would with the men's fellowship on Friday morning if we were meeting as normal. But for me, the political and the pastoral, as we navigate nationally the coronavirus, are very, very much the same. And here is one example. Healthcare is a very controversial topic in America. It's divided, opinions on it are divided by class, especially by political leanings and what have you. And so it's easy to treat healthcare as a political issue. And in a normal period, as normal as things get, healthcare is typically talked about in the political sense. And so even on the left, whether you prefer people who would fall into the same category as Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or Joe Biden or Pete Buttigieg, anywhere on the left, you'll see disagreements about healthcare. And people on the left are able to argue and meticulously and angrily sometimes argue in political ways about healthcare. Never mind the whole other side of the spectrum. But thankfully for me, I don't have to worry about too. But an example would be healthcare is chiefly a political thing. But what we have going on right now in our own congregation, in the city, and around the country is the fact that as the coronavirus and the shutdown of businesses have taken place, essentially people have been thrust, people who already did not have much of a safety net are thrust away in many cases from employment, which also means that they are thrust away unwillingly and unexpectedly from healthcare. And so we all of a sudden have people in our community who are very worried that they will not be able to afford their medication without insurance, or that the transition to unemployment will result in a gap with a financial cost that they are not well equipped to handle. And so typically when I'm writing a sermon this week about Lazarus, I get really stuck in the political pastoral discernment for about the first 6 days that I am thinking about what I'm going to do. And then always, as I've grown, not always, but as I have grown with the help of the staff, I have been pointed towards a much deeper pastoral consideration. And I think it's helped me be a better preacher and a better minister. And so I don't want to get stuck, in that discussion. Just naming the difficulty for me, and maybe for some of you all, the draw to demand justice, in terms of healthcare, and maybe suggest something like healthcare should not be tied to employment as a pastoral word and not a political word. That's the big dilemma for me. But this week, even as we're swimming in day-to-day changes, as we're swimming in reality shifting announcements in the New York Times and the Washington Post and on the news, on a day-to-day basis, I don't really feel the need to live in politics this weekend or Sunday, because I do it Monday through Friday and Saturday, and sometimes Saturday night, and sometimes Sunday after church. And I'm not advocating for not engaging politics on Sunday at all. But what I am suggesting is that maybe we can do both and understand, and I have to tell myself that it's okay to try to approach things differently in a sermon than I would in an op-ed or in an angry Facebook post or something like that. I was speaking with someone a mentor of mine whose opinion I value quite a bit. And I think like one of the biggest marks of my improvement over the past 5 years, personally and professionally, is that my life these days looks a lot more, and I want it to look a lot more like a poem or a story of hope rather than an angry political post on Facebook. And so this morning, I want to name that I am with each of you all if you are struggling with making sense of things and finding hope and justice as possibilities with everything that we see going on. And if you'd like to have the political conversation, I would love to do that because that's what I spend my free time doing in many ways. But this morning, I want to think about, and I will close with all of that preamble, what we need as a congregation and as people, social distancing, what we need in our lives today. And our story this weekend is the story of Lazarus. And so the story of Lazarus is one, we're going to read a long passage on Sunday from the Gospel of John. But I want to kind of avoid that deep dive into Scripture and just encourage you to go look at John 11. With John 11, 1 through 45 is what we'll be reading together this Sunday. But in this story, we find Jesus grieving and weeping at the death of his friend Lazarus. And there's many characters in this story, women so crucial to the narrative of Scripture, the usual suspects, Jesus' disciples, and all the others that we'll find in the story. But at its core, it's a story about grief and resurrection, in my opinion, and human relationship underneath all of it. And so this morning, my question for you is, if we consider Lazarus not just as a person, but as a verb, my question to you is, what do you need Lazarus in your life? What do you need today as now we're at whatever day it is in this period of social distancing and this new reality that we are experiencing, a very deep existential shifting on our understanding of ourselves and our country. What is it that you need as you sit and think this morning from home, or as you go about your altered routine, or as you retire tonight and get ready for bed? What do you need resurrected? What could your church, your family, God resurrect, or Lazarus for you from wherever it is now into a new way of life, a new freedom, a new happiness, a new injection of vitality and of energy into that which is currently really a place of difficulty for you? And the first place that I ever heard, and the first time I ever heard Lazarus used as a verb, was in a poem by Preston Perry, a poet who was delivering a poem about Mike Brown, the boy who was killed in Ferguson, now not too long ago, but that time in our history is further away today than it was when I first ran into that poem. But Preston Perry wondered aloud about Mike Brown's mother trying to Lazarus Mike Brown back into life with her embrace. And that was the first time I had really considered or heard in a powerful way what was probably at the core of Jesus's relationship with Lazarus, was a love so deep that he would have brought him back from anything and would have done anything for him. And so in thinking of Lazarus as a verb, my question for you is, what do you need resurrected or Lazarus? What can you, Lazarus, for one another? What can God, Lazarus, for you from what is into what could be? And so that's just a thought for this morning. I hope that you will consider looking at the Gospel of John And forgive me if my sermon is far afield from what I'm sharing with you now or thinking aloud with you about now, but so it goes for young and inexperienced associate pastors navigating national crises. So what I'm going to close with is a little bit of a poem by Lawrence Ferlinghetti. I do not want this to be brought down for copyright issues, so I guess I should say, this is not my poem. It is by Lawrence Ferlinghetti. It is called I Am Waiting. I do not have the rights to it. I don't know what rights have to do with public readings of poetry. I'm not going to read the whole thing, and if it gets taken down, I apologize. Hopefully that will cover us. But I Am Waiting by Lawrence Ferlinghetti. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I will encourage you, and maybe I'll put in the comments a link to this. But here's the poem, part of it. I am waiting for my case to come up, and I am waiting for a rebirth of wonder, and I am waiting for someone to really discover America and wail, and I am waiting for the discovery of a new symbolic Western frontier, and I am waiting for the American eagle to really spread its wings and straighten up and fly right, and I am waiting for the age of anxiety to drop dead. And I am waiting for the war to be fought which will make the world safe for anarchy. And I am waiting for the final withering away of all governments, and I am perpetually awaiting a rebirth of wonder. I am awaiting the second coming, and I am waiting for a religious revival to sweep through the state of Arizona, and I am waiting for the grapes of wrath to be stored, and I am waiting for them to prove that God really is American. And I am waiting to see God on television piped onto church altars if only they can find the right channel to tune in on. And I am waiting for the Last Supper to be served again with a strange new appetizer. And I am perpetually awaiting a rebirth of wonder. I am waiting for my number to be called, and I am waiting for the Salvation Army to take over. And I am waiting for the meek to be blessed and inherit the earth without taxes, and I am waiting for forests and animals to reclaim the earth as theirs. Just an excerpt from that poem by Lawrence Ferlinghetti. I'll put it in the comments. I think all of us are waiting for a rebirth of wonder. All of us need resurrection and to be Lazarus by love in whatever ways we might be fortunate enough to find love in each of our lives. But this morning, as I get ready for Sunday, I just want you each to know that I miss being with the congregation in person. Social distancing is hard, and it's not just hard in the short term, but it's hard to imagine the long term. And so for today, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to name that I'm grateful for each of you, that I love each of you, and that my hope is that as we are waiting together, that resurrection will be possible in ways great and small. And so I look forward to preaching with you on Sunday. I look forward to reaching out to you and finding new ways of being together in this interim period, this interim period of social distancing, which we are experiencing alone together.